B. Collins.
Peter B. Collins, news and comment. It's Friday, June 14th, 2019. As we observe 10 years of podcasting this week, I have more check-ins from my far-flung listening audience to share with you. And yesterday, I forgot to mention a landmark. Yesterday's podcast was number 2,600. I don't know, is that a Guinness? I doubt it. Not a Guinness World Record, but it's a record for me. And as we speak, the war drums are getting louder. Yesterday's concocted events in the Gulf of Oman, seized upon by U.S. leadership with a fierce propaganda lockdown, blaming Iran while presenting zero evidence. Well, there's a video we'll get to in a moment, but there is no compelling evidence to establish the claims that are coming from the hotheads in the Trump administration, including Mike Pompeo, who plays Secretary of State these days, that there's any evidence that Iran is responsible for this, and it clearly is being used to ratchet up tensions. In a phone call to Foxy Friends today, Trump said, well, Iran did do it. And you know, they did it because you saw the boat. I guess one of the mines didn't explode, and it's probably got essentially Iran written all over it. That was their boat. That was them. And they didn't want the evidence left behind. What he was referring to is some grainy black and white video footage released by the U.S. military, which they say shows an Iranian patrol boat pulling alongside one of the stricken ships several hours after it had been hit, and removing an object from the side of the ship. Now, I said grainy. There is not sufficient resolution to this video to establish what was going on there. And let's say for a moment that it actually was a mine that was somehow magnetically or otherwise attached to the side of this ship. That doesn't prove that Iran did it. And even if Iran is removing it, they might be looking for evidence of who actually is responsible, like the U.S. CIA, the Israeli Mossad. Those are the two key actors who have the most to gain from demonizing Iran. And so this is a very dangerous situation. Trump sends these mixed signals at one moment saying he wants to engage in talks with the Iranians, and then on Thursday night he tweeted, "I'm ready when they are." Oh, wait a minute. No, Thursday, see, even I get confused. On Thursday, he tweeted, "It is too soon to even think about making a deal. They're not ready, and neither are we." But talking to the Foxy Friends, "I'm ready when they are. Whenever they're ready, it's okay. In the meantime, I'm in no rush." Now, the idea that Iran would want to engage in talks with the United States, which is an unreliable counterpart. We unilaterally withdrew from the painstakingly negotiated six-nation deal with Iran that was the signature foreign policy achievement of Barack Obama and his last Secretary of State, John Kerry. And this dangerous situation is leading to a lot of skepticism, starting in Europe, where leaders are asking for hard evidence of these claims. And in the omniscient voice of the New York Times, I'm quoting, "Europeans are no fans of the Iranian government or its policies, but they're concerned by what they see as the Trump administration's policy of maximum pressure on Iran, thus their use of maximum restraint. Many critics believe Trump is succeeding only in creating maximum pressure among hardline factions in Iran to respond with carefully calibrated attacks that send a message, like those against tankers in a vital passageway for global oil supplies." Now, that last part is sheer speculation. In terms of these carefully targeted, carefully calibrated attacks, we don't know that to be true. The skepticism is certainly well warranted and quite welcome. Here is a big if statement, and this is coming from an Iran expert with the European Council on Foreign Affairs named Eli Garanmia. Assuming Iran is behind these attacks, which is not yet certain, Europe sees this as a calculated, managed, and fairly rational response to continual and increased U.S. sanctions pressure. We'll keep seeing cycles of this escalation designed to make everyone in the region nervous. And what worries Europeans, she said, is the likelihood of miscalculations. And another expert cited, Natalie Tochi from... she's an advisor to the European Foreign Policy Chief. She said Washington's policy is having the predictable effect of weakening moderates in Iran and strengthening the hand of hardliners. And the Pentagon, U.S. Central Command, and U.S. intelligence all predicted possible attacks on shipping as a response to increased American pressure. But don't let those descriptions mislead you. There is no evidence that Iran is responsible for this. And I see the kind of Israeli propaganda tactics that have been used, assaulting the ships in the Gaza Freedom Flotilla in international waters, and then releasing carefully edited videos to make it look like the Israelis were provoked somehow by these unarmed peacemakers. Well, this is the kind of maneuver that we have seen before. An event occurs, and before the media can get its pants on, they have already been fed a narrative with very firm claims, just no evidence. And what really astounded me, and as you know, if you're a regular listener, I've been sharply critical of Rachel Maddow for her nightly telenovela on Russiagate, using unproven claims, anonymous sources, and evidence that we can't see to repeatedly assert as fact matters that are unproven. And so it warmed the cockles of my heart to watch MSNBC last night and hear Rachel Maddow apply skepticism to claims coming from the intelligence community. Now, different actors, of course, require a different response from Ms. Maddow. But listen for a moment as she warms up for an interview with Susan Rice, who was a national security advisor to Obama and also served as UN ambassador.
That Mike Pompeo is trying to lay the groundwork for the U.S. waging war on Iran. Today, you may have seen the dramatic pictures of two oil tankers that were the subject of some kind of attack in the Gulf of Oman. Without presenting any evidence to back up the assertion, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo rushed immediately to a sort of highly produced news conference today at the State Department in which he pronounced that attack on those tankers in the Gulf of Oman was definitely the work of Iran. The U.S. government has assessed that was definitely Iran who did it. Now, again, he gave no evidence to back up this assertion, and it's totally possible that it was the work of Iran. But the U.S. government today, jumping out basically immediately upon reports of that attack on those tankers, right? The U.S. government jumping out immediately and saying they've completed their assessment, they have definitively concluded it's definitely Iran. That is what is making everybody have flashbacks to the run-up to the war in Iraq in 2003.
So this is the Rhodes Scholar that I once admired. And just change the terminology there. Substitute Russia for Iran. She was unable to question the intelligence that was foisted on the American people by Clapper and Brennan, promoting this Russiagate falderall. And in the limited hangout Mueller investigation, they basically embraced the findings of the intel community and provided no additional evidence. Because, after all, we already believe it. Why would they need to prove it? And so, Rachel Maddow, I'm glad you found some skepticism. And I hope you will continue to apply it, because as recently as a couple of weeks ago, You are all on board for regime change in Venezuela, based on the false notion that Maduro is an illegitimate leader, that the election was rigged last year. Nobody's ever bothered to apply skepticism to that, and you won't hear a single voice allowed on Rachel Maddow's show who offers skepticism or contradiction to the claims of the Trump administration vis-a-vis Venezuela. So this is a remarkable exception. I'm not sure what's driving it, but I'll take it. The Guardian reports that the rudderless, leaderless government of the United Kingdom is joining with the United States to blame Iran for this and to assert, without providing any public evidence. Here's Jeremy Hunt, the Foreign Secretary. I condemn yesterday's attacks on 2 vessels in the Gulf of Oman. Our own assessment leads us to conclude that responsibility for the attacks almost certainly lies with Iran. These latest attacks build on a pattern of destabilizing Iranian behavior and pose a serious danger to the region. And so we have this echo chamber. And the British echoed on Russiagate. The U.S. provided the echo chamber on the Skripal attacks in Salisbury, where there was never any public evidence provided that Novichok was used. And we don't even have rational people in the media who said, well, gosh, if it was on the doorknobs, and then these people went to a public park, well, why didn't somebody else get exposed to it? And then there was the throwaway perfume container that allegedly had Novichok, and some druggies picked it up, and one of them died. It's the whole scenario of the Skripal-Salisbury incident is highly suspicious and remains evidence-free. And I, of course, am only speculating that Britain is scratching America's back because we backed them on that Novichok nonsense. Meanwhile, highly inconvenient, contradictory reporting comes from CBS News, another place where I haven't seen skepticism, even on their vaunted 60 Minutes investigative magazine show, in years. CBS interviewed Yutaka Katada. He is the president of the company that owns one of the ships. And he said flatly that his sailors saw flying objects, not just one, but 2, hit the ship. Now, they could have been bullets, maybe .50 caliber bullets. They could have been some form of missile. We don't have enough descriptors here to get more specific than a flying object hitting the boat. But he flatly denied any possibility of mines or torpedoes because the damage was above the ship's waterline. And if you are Iranian sailors on a patrol boat and you want to blow up a tanker in the Gulf of Oman, do you just have magnetic mines floating in the water that any ship could run into and get attached to? I mean, it doesn't make fundamental sense. And if you attach a mine to a ship, you would do it below the waterline, not above. Anything above is not intended to sink the ship. And so, once again, we have more questions than answers. And I value the alternative media more than ever at a time like this. And I turned to Gray Zone Project today, and Ben Norton's got a great summary of the story. And he said by this morning, the morning of Friday, June 14, the narrative had fallen apart, with the Japanese cargo company Kokuka Sangyo telling journalists that the U.S. government's version was simply bogus. And they used the quote, "The crew is saying that it was hit by a flying object. They are saying that something came flying. To put a bomb on the side is something that we are not thinking," he said in comments at a news conference. Then they report on the U.S. video that was released. And as we see Trump and Pompeo, doubled down on the narrative of a mine attached to the side of the ship and the Iranians coming to get a dud and recover it. I'm not buying what they're selling. And I credit The Intercept with a smart report today on the attitude of Secretary of State Pompeo about what would be necessary to launch a war against Iran. He claims that the blank check that Bush signed after 9/11, the authorization for use of military force against those who allegedly attacked us on 9/11, Iran had nothing to do with that. Saudi Arabia is a more likely suspect just on the flat fact that 15 of the 19 hijackers came from Saudi. And to their credit, Tulsi Gabbard, Elizabeth Warren, candidates for president, Democrats, along with spokespersons for Cory Booker and Kirsten Gillibrand, said flatly it would be illegal. And there is discussion about meetings that were held with Mike Pompeo, April 10th. And Gabbard said we were all in that meeting with Pompeo, where statements were made that the AUMF from 2001 could work because, after all, he claims there are strong connections between Iran and al-Qaeda. Quote, very real connections, says Pompeo. Unfortunately, we do have people standing up. Here's a quote from Tulsi Gabbard. I completely disagree, 100% disagree. That's one of the reasons why I've been so concerned about what this administration is doing. Because in their mind, they could unilaterally start a war with Iran without congressional authorization, which would be unconstitutional and illegal. But who cares? They were not going to impeach him, right? And one of the other things that's very hard to read from the outside is how much Trump is listening to John Bolton and Mike Pompeo and how much he is being gamed and conned by them. Are they maneuvering around him? Did they arrange a false flag attack on these tankers to force the president's hand after he's made these contradictory statements about being tough on Iran and willing to sit down and talk with them? We will continue to watch this emerging situation here on the podcast. There was a hearing in Britain today before Chief Magistrate Emma Arbuthnot. I believe she's the one who hammered Julian Assange in that first hearing. Anyway, she has set a schedule for the proceedings over his extradition to the United States to face 18 charges, including 17 under the Espionage Act. He will face a 5-day extradition hearing in February of 2020, near the end of the month. Starts on February 25th. Assange was dressed in a gray T-shirt. He appeared by a video link. He had a white beard and was wearing black frame glasses. He interrupted at one point when he was accused of cracking a U.S. Defense Network password. He said, I didn't break any password whatsoever. The only other quote I have from him is he said, WikiLeaks is nothing but a publisher. So that's going to be a long one. They are appealing his 50-week sentence in Britain for bail jumping, but I don't expect him to get any relief on that. Every day I pause for a moment to thank people who support my work here at the Peter B. Collins Podcast with your subscriptions. And this week, I am getting great emails from people all around the world who listen to this podcast on a regular basis. I invite you to check in too. Just send an email to peter@peterbcollins.com. I am looking to see if the Google Analytics are accurate, that we have this podcast being downloaded in 71 countries. And Jason Ferguson checks in. He says that he listened to the podcast over the years when he was in Kuwait and Afghanistan, and now he listens while making dinner in South Korea. And he has some interesting comments. He likes the news and comment. He has time to listen to one long interview a week. And he said, I've tried the other shows every now and then, but just never got hooked. I'm not sure if, I guess he's referring to other podcasts there. Anyway, Jason, I do appreciate that. Also, I want to mention that it's Julie Dupree, who is a big supporter of a community radio station in Silicon Valley, and they're having a psychedelic nonstop weekend. If you want to check it out, it's kkup.org, kkup.org. And I also want to thank George Maschke, who checked in from The Hague, that's in the Netherlands. He said, congratulations for 10 years. Well, it's almost 10 years ago that I first learned about your podcast when you and Sibel Edmonds did a joint interview with NSA whistleblower Russ Tice. And that's when I heard from George about polygraph issues. And he says, I enjoy the daily news and comment, have rarely missed an episode. Wow, thanks for the dedication. You tend to be interested in the same kinds of stories I am, with a focus on civil liberties, and it's convenient to catch up in the morning while I'm getting ready to go to work by listening to your podcast. So I really appreciate the people who do devote time to listen to this on a daily or regular basis, and I'm gratified that so many people value the commentary that I offer. And I'm going to keep doing it. My commitment is to work at least through the 2020 presidential election in November of next year, and then I will reassess. At some point, I do want to retire, but I feel compelled to show up and do this every day. I know so many people who shed a crocodile tear yesterday when they heard the news that Sarah Huckabee Sanders is exiting the White House. She didn't get thrown out. It apparently is a resignation, not forced. And while I have resisted the tendency to make catty comments about her appearance, I have mostly maintained my composure about Sarah Sanders. But she is a lying person. I was going to use a stronger term there, and I controlled myself. But she has lied for a compulsive liar. She has falsified information, misled the public, denied access to information that we have a right to. And she has been the most miserable White House press secretary in my entire lifetime. And there have been some doozies along the way. Reagan and Nixon and the Bushes, they've had some really nefarious people in that job. But none were as offensive to me as Sanders. And I want to recommend Margaret Sullivan's commentary at the Washington Post today, calling her the Queen of Gaslighting. And that is a well-earned crown. Be happy to crown her with a Burger King crown. But, you know, the biggest lie she got caught in was when she said that she had received emails and lots of messages from FBI employees who were thrilled when James Comey was fired. And she was forced to admit to Robert Mueller that she made that shit up. And Mueller let her off instead of calling her a liar and you know, I guess she didn't lie to the investigators, she just lied to the American people. And she claimed that her reference to hearing from countless members of the FBI was a slip of the tongue. Now, that's bullshit. Compounded bullshit. We have some really troubling news coming from the regions where normally the ice has not melted yet, here in the middle of June. Two fronts in the concerns about climate change. Data from the National Snow and Ice Center show that the Greenland ice sheet appears to have witnessed its biggest melt event so early in the season on record this week. Now, the satellite imagery only goes back to 1979, so I just want to be clear about the context of that claim. But a big dome of high pressure has positioned itself over Greenland with sunny skies and mild temperatures day after day, causing the ice to melt. And in the Arctic, they've had extreme warm temperatures in Alaska and further north for the last couple of weeks. sea ice loss over the Chukchi and Beaufort Seas along Alaska's northern coast have been unprecedented, according to a climatologist based in Fairbanks, and a similar high-pressure zone has facilitated the unusual warmth, and the permafrost is melting. And if you've listened to our interview with Guy McPherson, permafrost and the accelerated release of carbon that its melting will produce are a grave concern about the exponential increase in the rate of sea level rise and extreme weather events. The DNC has made its decision about who gets into the first round of debates coming up on June 26th and June 27th on the NBC channels. And, they had to make tough decisions to split the 20 people who qualified into groups of 10. But the way it plays out is that Elizabeth Warren will essentially be the headliner at the kids' table for the first debate, and the second night features Biden and Bernie Sanders and Kamala Harris, who's showing up in the polls. It's whatever they do is going to be imperfect, and somebody will complain. Steve Bullock, the governor of Montana, Congressman Seth Moulton of Massachusetts, and Mayor Wayne of Miramar, Florida, didn't make the cut, and they'll be bleating about that to whoever will listen to it. But I once presided over complicated set. In 1992, California had 2 open U.S. Senate seats. And so I put together joint debates for both of those races. And I was working at a radio station. We had a television station partner and a newspaper partner. And there were so many people running that we had to have a system of who got invited and who didn't. And we excluded the weaker candidates. And it produced a lot of bad blood and backbiting. But that is inevitable. Trump went on Foxy Friends, I mentioned that earlier, to talk about the Iran situation, but he also tried to walk back his claim the other day that if a foreign nation like Norway gave him dirt on his 2020 presidential candidate opponent, that he'd absolutely look at it. Well, today he's saying he would absolutely report something like that to the FBI, which is not what he said the other day. And I don't think that's going to go anywhere. He also got the word that he should fire Kellyanne Conway and said that he won't, as I predicted yesterday. Now, the Trump administration, through the Office of Refugee Resettlement, which is part of Health and Human Services, has tried to deny access to abortion for several young women who have come into custody of ICE having crossed our border while pregnant. And a federal appeals court has slammed the door on their efforts to deny abortion rights to these migrant women. In an 81-page opinion, the court concluded it was rejecting the government's position that its denial of abortion access can be squared with the Supreme Court precedent of Roe v. Wade and Casey. Here's a quote from the ruling. "We are not free to dilute a constitutional right recognized by controlling Supreme Court precedent, a right the government affirmatively assumes unaccompanied minors here have, so that others will be dissuaded from seeking a better life in this country." Now, the government, the Trump administration, actually claimed that these women have a choice. They can just self-deport and get an abortion in their home countries. And that, of course, is a ridiculous oversimplification of the situations that these young women face. So the court concluded that the policy amounted to a complete ban that violated the U.S. Supreme Court precedent, and that leaves it up to the government to appeal for a full en-banc hearing by the appeals court and possible appeal to the U.S. Supreme Court, where Brett Kavanaugh is just waiting to get the case. Duncan Hunter may be on his way out as a member of Congress. He's the Republican who barely held on to his San Diego seat in the midterms last year because he and his wife are under indictment for diverting $200,000 worth of campaign funds for personal use. Trips to Italy, flying the pet rabbit from San Diego to Washington, and lots of fancy dinners and drinks. Margaret Hunter admitted in court she and her husband used the funds as their personal bank account. And Duncan Hunter, he's got a lot of explaining to do. Those protesters in Hong Kong have to be aware that their communications are heavily monitored by the Chinese government. And there was a denial of service attack on Telegram, the secure messaging app that is used by many of the protesters. And it turns out when you do a group chat on Telegram, it's not encrypted end to end. The police are also using cell phones to track suspects and track them down and arrest them. And security forces in mainland China track chat messages. They arrest dissidents before protests even can occur. And they're increasingly detaining people over posts critical of the government. And finally today, Facebook, represented by an attorney in a court case over the privacy of data that was shared with Cambridge Analytica and others, made some remarkable claims. He basically is saying if you click like once on Facebook, you've given up your privacy. He said there is no expectation of privacy by anybody who uses Facebook. Quote, there is no privacy interest because by sharing with 100 friends on a social media platform, which is an affirmative social act to publish, to disclose, to share ostensibly private information with 100 people, you have just, under centuries of common law, negated any reasonable expectation of privacy. He says, if I share information with 10 people, that doesn't eliminate my expectation of privacy. Oh, I'm sorry, this is a comment from the judge. If I share with 10 people, that doesn't eliminate my expectation. It might diminish it, but it doesn't eliminate it. And the most troubling comment is this idea. The very act of liking something and showing your friends that you like something is a non-private act. It's the whole premise of Facebook and social media, to render not private your likes, your dislikes, your expressions, but to make them public. Now, this is a disingenuous response, because the issue is not, that I liked something. It's that Facebook takes that information and shares it with advertisers. And who knows who else, like political operators like Cambridge Analytica. That's where the violation occurs. Facebook doesn't get it. And we are their dupes. Thanks for listening to my daily news and comment podcast. You'll find it on YouTube. You can share it with anyone. And I'm still Peter B. Collins.
Happy trails to you until we meet again. Happy trails.